In 2019, a rescue team arrived at a wind-battered island in the North Atlantic. They found a lighthouse, an empty cottage, and thousands of spirals meticulously carved into the rocks and driftwood. The man who left them there was Elias Vance. He had spent 15 years as a clinical neuroscientist, publishing a series of papers on the biological markers of cognitive isolation. He had spent half a decade on a joint study with his closest colleague, Marcus Reed. But when it came time to publish, Marcus submitted the findings under his own name, erasing Elias's contributions and taking sole credit for the work. Stripped of his professional standing, Elias traveled to the exact remote island where he and Marcus had once studied isolation in others. He decided to become the sole subject of his own experiment. While it is common to assume that a total social vacuum simply shatters the mind, the data suggests a more active response. When external reality is removed, the brain is forced to aggressively manufacture its own. At first, Elias attempted to maintain academic discipline. He marked off dates on a wall calendar and kept a meticulous journal of his daily routines and supplies. But human time perception relies on environmental and social cues. Without conversations or varying tasks to break up the hours, the days began to blur. The calendar eventually became a collection of meaningless marks. This diagram shows the biological cost of that lost structure. As neural pathways linked to time tracking decay, the brain enters a search mode, firing off new patterns of activity to find any available anchor. When artificial systems like clocks and calendars fail, the mind must find a more primal way to organize its existence. One evening, Elias found himself tracing a spiral shape into the wet sand. When the ocean tide washed it away, he experienced a severe spike of distress, a physiological reaction to losing a part of his environment he had created. This infographic illustrates meaning-making. In historical examples of solitary confinement, prisoners invent elaborate routines to fill the void of human interaction. These self-generated symbols provide a substitute for society. By creating a physical marker and seeing it remain, the brain forms a shield against emptiness. This obsessive carving functioned as a psychological stabilizer, a mechanical process the brain uses to maintain coherence when the external world disappears. This instinct soon escalated. Elias began carving the spiral into every surface of the cottage. He codified rigid, numbered rules in his journals, and eventually began addressing an empty wooden chair as if it were a physical presence. These rituals serve a specific function. By enforcing strict, arbitrary rules, the mind builds a predictable internal architecture, replacing the silence of the island with a system that is entirely under its control. The system became so vital to his stability that when a scheduled supply boat arrived months later, Elias did not seek rescue. He hid in the shadows of his cottage while the crew knocked, terrified of their intrusion. For Elias, the cult of one was no longer a choice. It was his reality. Returning to the outside world meant the destruction of the only structure left in his life. 2 years after he vanished, a search team extracted Elias and brought him back to a society that had already crowned Marcus Reed a success for the research he stole. Back on the mainland, Elias found a therapist who began to analyze the thousands of pages he had written. Unlike the rescue team, the therapist recognized the specific geometric patterns Elias had obsessively documented. The spiral was not a new discovery. Decades earlier, as a child frequently locked in a dark basement as a form of punishment, Elias had spent hours sitting on the floor, tracing that exact same shape into the dust to keep himself calm. In this state of total social deprivation, Elias's mind had reached back to the most durable survival tool it possessed, reviving a defense mechanism that had already been tested in his past. His recovery began when he reframed the island journals as a record of his own endurance. He stopped treating the carvings as sacred rules and began seeing them as evidence of his mind's ability to survive. He took those records out of isolation, eventually sharing them with a small support group. He found that passing the pages to others physically broke the loop of silence he had lived in for years. Isolation demonstrates the extreme lengths the brain will go to build its own meaning. But Elias's story suggests that the ultimate antidote to that silence is the simple act of being understood by another person.